Welcome to the Self-Publishing School podcast. This is the podcast to listen to if you're an aspiring writer or an author who wants to be more successful. On this show, you'll learn how to write and launch a book successfully, all from the top authors and people just like you who are doing it at the highest level. I'm your host, Chandler Bolt, the founder of Self-Publishing School, the author of the book called Published, and the CEO of selfpublishing.com. For free training on how to publish a book that sells 10,000 copies, go to selfpublishing.com/free training. Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today is AJ Jacobs, who, step aside Dos Equis. This guy's the most interesting man in the world. AJ, he's an author, journalist, lecturer, and human guinea pig. He's written 4 New York Times bestsellers that combine memoir, science, humor, and a dash of self-help. Among his books, maybe you've heard of him. He's got The Know-It-All. He's got The Year of Living Biblically. Can't say that. The Year of Living Biblically. He's got Thanks 1,000, where he travels the globe to thank everyone who had even the slightest role in making his morning cup of coffee. Such an interesting concept. And then he's got a book coming out in the next few months, depending on when you're listening to this or watching this, called The Puzzler: One Man's Quest to Solve the Most Baffling Puzzles Ever, from crosswords to jigsaws to the meaning of life. So AJ, super excited to have you here.
I'm delighted to be here, Chandler. A big fan of the show.
Well, thank you. So today I want to talk about, guys, what you're in for a treat. We're going to kind of try to go 2 parts. So writing unique books, and then what he's learned from 4 New York Times bestsellers. So it's kind of part marketing, part writing. But first, why did you decide to write the first book? I think it was The Know-It-All, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, that was my first real book. And I find inspiration from a lot of places, but one is just my life. I'm always looking. I always try to have another head on my shoulder saying, while I'm living life, would that be an interesting article or a book or a tweet or whatever? So my father, when I was a kid, he loved to read, he loved learning, and he started to read the encyclopedia, but he didn't quite make it. He made it up to the letter B, like around Bolivia. And I thought, well, what if I tried to do that? It's such a crazy, it's like an intellectual Mount Everest, reading this massive 44,000 page work and then writing about what it was like. So that one came from my real life, from my dad.
And then I think, it seems like that's kind of sparked this whole almost unique writing process, which is going on these crazy experiences and then writing about them. So right. I've got so many questions about this, but I guess for starters, like what does your writing process look like? And I guess maybe even backing up before that, how do you decide the topic that you're going to tackle next?
Right. Well, I will say, yeah, I am pretty good at generating ideas. Like I generate a lot of ideas. 99% of them are terrible. So that's just something to keep in mind. I feel that idea generation is crucial, but it's also a numbers game, Yes. And you talk to, I once did a whole article on creativity and trying to maximize my creativity, but you'll talk to creativity experts who will say, it really is a numbers game. Picasso painted some terrible paintings. It's all about, you got to keep trying to see what works, see what sticks to the wall. So I do spend 15 minutes a day, every day, in the morning, just generating ideas. And they could be book ideas, article ideas. They could be just random stream of consciousness. And every once in a while, there's a gem. I find if I keep thinking about an idea, like 2 weeks later, I'm like, well, maybe there's something to that. And I also do a lot of unofficial market research, where I'll tell people about the ideas, and you can tell, like, someone's eyes will light up, like, so, if they're friends, they might be polite, but you can tell the difference if something really.
So you're 15 minutes a day generating ideas, and then kind of just out in the wild, just unofficially, kind of street testing them. And then is that kind of how, based on that, do you then that combined with, oh, I'm still thinking about this 2 weeks later, is that how you kind of land on, all right, this is the next
Yeah,
big book project that
that's
I want
it.
to do?
That's
Or is
it.
there
I
any?
mean, it has to, there's a bunch of criteria it has to fulfill. So it has
Mm,
to be something that I think the audience will get something out of. I think it has to be something that I hope will entertain them, but also make their lives a little bit better. It has to be something I'm passionate about, because it's very hard to spend 2 years on something that you're not quite passionate about. I, it has to be something that you can sort of pitch in a 1 or 2 sentence uh, way. And I'm sure there are other criteria that I'm forgetting, but yeah, it has to check a bunch of boxes before I'll commit.
got it. So it's so those are the, at least the three criteria. It's going to entertain the audience while also teaching them something. It's something that you're passionate about, and then it can be summed up in a 1 to 2 sentence
Right.
pitch.
Oh,
So
I
it's
do
kind of
remember
like a
one.
marketable hook.
Yeah,
What's that?
definitely a marketable. And the other thing is I like to take on projects that I feel are big, like that they have, that the topic is big. So religion, health, puzzles, gratitude. And not, that's not every writer. Some writers do a great job writing an entire book about, a diplomatic incident in 1898. That's fine. That's fine. But for
Yeah.
me, writing the big topics I love, because you can explore them in 100 different ways.
And then how do you, I guess on the flip side, how do you go into a big topic without being a broad book that doesn't sell well? Right. So it's not just like how do
Right.
you both kind of encapsulate this big topic, but then also have kind of like a succinct hook that's compelling and unique?
Well, I would say a couple of things. One is I think the structure for me is so crucial. Like I'd wanted to write a book about health for a long time, but I couldn't figure out, like you said, how do I get into it? What's my hook? And then I started to think, well, what if I split it up by body part? So every chapter, I'll have a chapter about heart health and stomach health, but everyone has that. What if I did a chapter about hand health? And there are all these people who are like obsessed with hand health and hand exercises, and it's hilarious. So I was able to split it up into like 15 different chapters about 15 different parts of the body. I will say I'm embarrassed. I should have done the final should have been the appendix, but I didn't think of it. But yeah, so it's all about the structure. The same with my first book, the encyclopedias. I came up with a structure. Every chapter is a letter, and within that chapter, I'll take like 10 words. It could be Abbott and Costello, and then I'll write like a mini essay about Abbott and Costello, and what I forget what that one was about, but that one was actually about how Abbott, it was either Abbott or Costello basically stole the job. That Costello had another partner who was sick one day, and Abbott came as the replacement and just stayed. So it was like, just be careful, don't only call in sick. Only call in sick if you really have to. But anyway, that was the structure, and that is how I'm able to tackle the really big topics, is only if you have a very set structure and angle.
Got it. And so it sounds like coming up with a structure is almost the prerequisite or the first thing that you try to do that then helps the writing process make that easier? Or are you 6 months, a year in, and then it's like the structure hits and then now the book writing's.
No, for me, and it's not for everyone, I come up with a structure right at the start. Otherwise I'm lost. So for instance, this puzzle book, it's a huge topic, but I said, I'm going to devote one chapter to every different type of puzzle there is in the world. So, crosswords, Rubik's, jigsaws, logic, meaning of life. And then I'm able to write it. And I've actually started books where I didn't have a clear sense of structure, and they ended up falling apart. After 3 months, I had a contract for a book right before this that I abandoned just because I felt the structure wasn't there.
Wow, that's interesting. So you come up with the structure, and then can you walk us through So let's use your upcoming book as an example, or feel free to use any past books as well. But like, what does that process look like? Because it's a very much, I mean, not only are you kind of creating a genre of this memoir meets self-help meets humor meets science, like all that, but it's an experiential writing process.
Right.
So what does
Well,
that process look like?
uh, well, there are a few strands. One is just taking extensive notes on everything that happens in my life. There is the idea of I'm trying to go on a journey and take the reader along on a journey. So I always try to remember that. And it's good to be ignorant sometimes and and ask the dumb questions, because the reader is not an expert on puzzles. And a lot of it is also interviewing, talking to interesting people. And for every person who is featured in the book with a crazy story, I probably talked to 4 or 5 who were nice, but they didn't have that story that the reader is going to be like, oh man. So, and talking to one person will often lead, they'll say, oh, you got to talk to this person. Uh, and so anyway, I take extensive notes, and since I already have the structure, so I would interview the guy who solved the biggest jigsaw puzzle in the world, and I would have him in the jigsaw folder. And then I also like to do experiment, like first person. So I represented the United States at the International Jigsaw Puzzle Championship. So I wrote about that, so I have like 3 or 4 elements to every chapter. And then the last thing I do is to write. So I have all of the research, and then I finally get around to writing. And my writing process, which is not for everyone, but for me, I am a huge outliner. I love to outline. And I almost have my outlines get increasingly more filled out until it's almost like the book appears. Starts with a skeleton, and then you just keep adding muscles and skin and whatever until it's actually a fully fleshed out book.
And are you kind of, well, I guess first off, how long is that process usually of going through that experiment? And then are you writing and publishing kind of blog posts along the way? Or are you kind of holding it all for the book and then using those kind of in the lead up to the launch?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. It usually takes 2 years. And as for the blog posts, I'm very torn. I mean, I publish traditional mainstream, Random House is my own publisher. And traditionally, publishers have been very wary of releasing the book because they think that it's like there's only a certain amount of attention that people will give, and that if you blow it early on, then they're not going to pay attention when the book comes out. I don't know. It's a very complicated issue, and I'm part of why I'm going to start listening more to your show is to figure it out, because I have tried to get out my process more to involve people, and just one was actually turned out great, because I have the cover of my book is it's got a bunch of different puzzles on it, including a crossword puzzle, and it was done by a very talented artist. But I put it up on Facebook, and some of my more nitpicky puzzle friends were like, that looks good, but the crossword puzzle is all wrong. The numbers are wrong. There are no 2-letter words in the New York Times crossword puzzle. This is a disaster. You're going to be like nailed when this book comes out. So I was able to go back to the publisher and say, we got to redo it. And they did. So there are advantages to getting it out there early.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let's kind of fast forward to the marketing and to the launch. What's kind of your overarching philosophy for how you market books, and what do you find usually sells the most copies?
Sure. Well, first of all, I should say, like early in my career, I was sort of allergic to marketing. I was like, I'm a writer, I don't want to do this. But I had a total reframe. I'm like, this is not work. It is part of my job, and if I'm going to do it, let me try to do it in as creative and fun way as possible. So now I actually enjoy the marketing as much, maybe more than writing the book. So I before the show, I came up with like, sort of 4 pieces of advice for what works for me. One is, just trying to blanket the market and get as many mentions in as many different places as possible. And I don't have data on this, but at least for me, if I see a book mentioned in like 6 different places, I'm like, all right, fine, I'm going to buy it. So I try to take my topic and then split it up into as many different slices as possible. So for instance, with the book, I wrote a book about following all the rules of the Bible as literally as possible, from, the 10 Commandments to growing a huge beard. So, I wanted in the main, like the Time magazine and the New York Times, but I'm like, there's hundreds of other websites and publications. So for instance, I pitched Glamour magazine. I said, what if I did sex advice from the Bible? Because the Bible actually has some very racy passages. The Song of Solomon, they talk about the poet says that this woman's breasts are like 2 fawns grazing in the meadows. And so I'm like, that was like, make your compliments creative. Maybe don't compliment the breasts, but that doesn't fly anymore. But anyway, yeah. So, and they were like, oh, that's a funny angle. We don't have that. So I wrote a piece for them about biblical sex advice. I wrote one about biblical music for a music magazine, and on and on. I split it up into, and I'm doing the same thing with puzzles. I think that there's, there are puzzles about food. There are, so I'm going to try to pitch a food magazine about food-related puzzles. One, try to just blanket the market by slicing it up. I don't want to ramble on. If you have questions about that or any comments or anything.
Hey, Chandler Bolt here. I hope you're loving this episode so far. It's time to go from inspiration to implementation. All right, so if you've learned something, we want to help you implement what you've learned with your book. So what I want you to do right now is go to selfpublishing.com/schedule, book a publishing consultation with one of the experts on my team. We'll talk about your goals for your book, your dreams, your challenges, your next steps, and we'll start putting together a plan. All right, so go to selfpublishing.com/schedule, book a call with the team. Let's see how we can help with your book. It's time to implement. A practical takeaway for the audience as well, and specific to that, is something we talk about all the time. And I call it author appearances. It's like, how do you, whether it's a podcast interview, whether it's a speaking gig, whether it's publicity, PR, whatever, they're all really this bucket of author appearances with a goal to sell books or bring people into your audience. And so I think the one thing that you do so well, there's really 2 things specific to author appearances, publicity, whatever you want to call it, is starting with a hook and having a very clear, succinct, and provocative hook. I think that is almost even the starting point before you even write the book, right? Which a lot of people, that's an afterthought, or they don't even do it. And so I think you do that really well, but then also the specificity of the hook for the kind of the target, the place that you're going, right? And so like, because a lot of people would think, oh, a book about the Bible, I could never go to Glamour magazine, or I could never go to these pieces, but you're taking this core content and making it relevant to those outfits. And so I think those are 2 big takeaways for folks: is start with a clear and succinct hook, but then also customize the hook to who you're reaching out to, and you'll be more likely to get a yes and create a piece of engaging content that leads to book sales.
Right. There you go. Yeah. Love it.
Cool.
And actually
you're good.
Oh, this next tip is actually quite related, and because it is about customizing the hook and researching who you're going out for. So I wrote a book where it was all about family and family trees, and how everyone on Earth is related. And I had these researchers who were able to link me to pretty much anyone on earth. It was crazy. So I said, let me think about who would have big impact. New York Times. So I found a lifestyle reporter there, and I sent him an email and said, I know this sounds weird, but we're cousins. You and I are cousins, and here's how. And it was like 14 steps. We were like 14 steps removed. And I said, I just thought you'd be interested. This is the point of my book. And would you like to interview your cousin? And he responded, and I got the article in the New York Times. Now, it was a risk because I did that to other people. Some, maybe 20% were like, please never contact me again, like calling the security. I don't think anyone said that. But some people just didn't respond. But a lot of people did, because it was a unique way to reach out to the reporter. So whatever your book is, try to find a unique way when you email them or DM them, have a unique angle to why they should respond. So that's my next piece of advice.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
And well, this one, Mike Michaelwitz, who I'm a fan of, I listened to his show, and I was taking notes. This guy's good. But one of the things he said is try to be different. And so I wrote a book on gratitude, where, as you mentioned, I went around and thanked everyone who had anything to do with my morning cup of coffee. And as part of the marketing, I said, I put out on my newsletter and on Facebook, I said, I'm going to write 1,000 thank you notes to readers of my books. You don't even need to buy my new book. I don't need the proof. I just, this will just be a way to form a community and keep in touch with people. So I would write, I said, fill out this form. And I did. I got, more than 1,000 people. And it actually took me like a year and a half to handwrite every single person on that list. And because it was also not just like, thanks for reading my books. I had them fill out something about them. What do you like? What are your interests? What do you like about anything in my books that resonated? And then I would tailor it to that person. So I could only write a couple a day. And some of them were crazy, like, please draw me a picture of a dog eating a taco. I'm like, all right, that's what you want. That's what I'll do. I'm not an artist, but it was so lovely because I got such good feedback from the people who got them, and a lot of them would put them on Instagram or Twitter. So it was sort of generate additional publicity, even though I was only sending it to one person.
Yeah,
it would get out there, and it was just a great way to keep. I don't have the statistics on the return on investment on that, like how many actual books I sold, but I just have the feeling that it was well, first of all, it made me feel good, and hopefully it made them feel good. But I also think that it was really, I still get feedback, oh, this guy said he loves your books and you wrote him a thank you note. So yeah, that reminded me of Mike's bill, where he, you got to be different. You can't just do the same email to everyone.
That's great. And so I think I missed this. Were you saying was this like a bulk order or pre-order campaign, and then people got a thank you note as a result of this? Were these random people, a list of people? Who were these people that were getting the thank you notes?
They were people who had filled out a form on my website saying they were a fan of mine and wanted a thank you note. Originally, I was going to ask for a receipt. I was going to, that was my original idea. But, and maybe that's a good idea. Maybe someone should do that. It made me felt a little skeezy. And I was like, you know what? This whole thing is about gratitude. So I'm not going to try to turn it into something transactional, you know. So it's like, let me try to take the high road here and just write
Yeah,
anyone who's ever read my books, whether from the library or not.
got it.
So yeah, that was a memorable marketing strategy.
Yeah, that's awesome. What would you say, AJ, what would you say the commonalities of your top selling books? Is there anything that you've noticed is like, oh, I did this thing, or topically it was related to this, or any commonalities that you see?
Uh, yeah, there are a few, like we talked about before, something that you can summarize in 1 or 2 sentences. So my best-selling book today is The Year of Living Biblically, which, you can, the title alone is basically the premise is right there. I lived a year by all the rules of the Bible. Thanks 1,000 sold pretty well, and that is also easy to summarize. I went around and thanked 1,000 people who had anything to do with my morning cup of coffee. I also I've given several TED Talks that I think do help with sales. And even if they don't help with sales, actually, they help with getting speaking gigs at corporations or colleges or even churches and synagogue. So, but for a TED Talk, you have to have a very specific angle, and these books lend themselves to that angle. Like, as you said, it can't be just about a book about Canada. Like, it has to have a very marketable hook. So yeah, those are some of the things that I think have helped. I mean, one thing that is interesting, I think, all of the books have been featured on TV or morning shows. Nowadays, you would probably do better having a viral video, but something visual. I do try while I'm writing. I take a lot of footage and photographs, knowing that these TV shows are going to ask for B-roll. And the Bible book was particularly visual because the Bible says you cannot shave your beard. And I had a crazy beard. I looked insane. So, that was actually very helpful, the visual.
Yeah, that's cool. So a couple routes I want to ask a follow-up on the Year of Living Biblically, and then I want to talk a little bit about the TED Talk component that you mentioned. So you mentioned, I mean, the Year of Living Biblically is like kind of like one of the just punchiest, clear, direct hooks of a book that you've had. Anything else that you would attribute to kind of why that book has sold so well?
Well, first of all, I think religious themed books, I sometimes think I should have written another religious themed book, because those actually do sell well, because at least if the people in the communities like them, like, the pastors would recommend it to their parishioners or the rabbis, and that is huge. And I got lucky in this one because and it was partially planned, but partially not. It was that, I didn't go in with an axe to grind. I grew up in a very secular home with no religion, but I said, what is the appeal of religion? Why would people still believe in this? So I wanted to find both the good parts of religion and the problematic parts, and like fundamentalism show that this really is a huge problem. So I tried to write a very balanced book, and it turned out that way. So I got hundreds of letters from atheists saying, thank you for showing how crazy the Bible can be. But I would get the same or more from religious people saying, thank you for showing the good side of religion and helping me through my faith. So I got very lucky in that sense.
That's interesting. And so you feel like by writing an objective book, it led to a better book, which led to it being recommended by people who were on both sides.
Yes. I mean, I wouldn't use the word objective because it's very subjective. It was all about my experience, but I would say I tried to write a balanced book. I tried to be driven by curiosity. in all of my books, because which is the whole point of the puzzle book. It's all about curiosity. And at least for me, that has worked out. I mean, there are a lot of books that are very argumentative that do great. And maybe I would do better if you look at the bestseller list, there's a lot, Trump is the devil, or Trump is God. Those books do sell. So I'm not saying mine is the only route, but this is the one that I feel most comfortable with, and so far has worked for me.
Yeah, well, and just in some of my research before this interview, I mean, I think what I found interesting, and you didn't go full blown or really anywhere on the spectrum of like sensationalist type books, to your point. But what I think is interesting is I think that book may be your lowest review, lowest Amazon rating of 4.4, I think was like the average. And my hunch when I was looking at it, I'm like, this is probably not reflective of the quality of the book. It's the classic Perry Marshall concept, if you've ever heard of it, of the 3-star reviewed book that has no 3-star reviews. And it's like basically all 5 stars, like raving fans, I love this book. All 1 stars, like this guy's an idiot. I haven't even read the book, but this is so dumb. And just kind of like this. And so I don't think it's anywhere near on that spectrum, but I would imagine somewhere within the realm of that is you kind of have that it's a polarizing and intriguing topic. And then people are probably pleasantly, which leads to more book sales, but then people are probably pleasantly surprised with kind of the, as you said, subjective but curiosity driven kind of stance of the book.
But you're right. Yeah, there were people who didn't even read the book who were offended about that. I mean, my favorite Amazon review was actually for my book, Thanks 1,000, where it was a 1-star review because the person, I think it was a woman, was very upset that she had gotten it in the same box as the mustard she had ordered from Amazon, and the mustard had spilled on my book. And so I was somehow, that reflects on the quality of my book.
Oh man, my favorite was on one of my, I think this was my first book. It had nothing to do with mustard, but somebody said, I regret that I bought the Kindle version so that this couldn't even be used for something worthwhile like a doorstop. I'm like, oh man, first book, first 1-star review. This is brutal. No mustard was harmed in the creation of this negative review. Well, AJ, I got a couple, we're in the home stretch here. I got a couple final questions for you. You mentioned the TED Talk piece. How'd you get booked for those TED Talks? And from what you can tell, I mean, obviously Amazon doesn't give you great data, nor do publishers, but from what you can tell, do TED Talks move books? And any advice for people who are kind of thinking about going down that route, whether it's a TED Talk, TEDx Talk, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think they do. As you say, it's very hard to get data. I mean, it certainly is huge in terms of visibility. And as I say, in terms of booking, if that's the route you want to go, in terms of booking other speaking gigs, like there still is something about the TED badge of quality, seal of approval. I would say in terms of getting it, I mean, I did it a long time ago, so it was not as big then, so it was easier to pitch if you didn't have connections. So I just like met someone at a party and told them about my book. It's like, yeah, that could be a fun TED Talk. But yeah, as far as I can tell, in terms of pitching, you definitely do want, I mean, one is, of course, like if you have a friend of a friend of a friend who knows the folks at TED, that helps. But certainly, like coming up with a very, like we said, a very, what's the word I'm looking for?
Big idea, provocative, big idea.
Provocative, something that can be summarized, in like a Hollywood style pitch, and perhaps counterintuitive. That always seems to appeal to people. But yeah, so I would just write it up as like a 3-paragraph pitch, and then just, I'm sure there's an address on the TED website if you don't have someone who knows someone who knows someone.
Yeah.
But yeah, make it. And then I also find, before I did the TED Talks, I would do other smaller events just to practice and see what resonated with people.
Yeah.
Because there really is no substitute for getting
Yeah.
out there and doing it in front of an audience and seeing what works.
Real audience feedback. And I mean, I know your TED Talks have over 10 million views at this point. So there's gotta be some book sales in there.
Exactly.
Final couple questions for you. So I noticed, I think it's in most, if not all, of your book titles is One Man's Quest. What is there intentionality behind that? Is that for branding? Like, what's the thought behind kind of, or either One Man's Quest or One Man's Humble Quest? What's the
Right.
thought behind having that in the titles?
Well, first of all, I just think the word quest is exciting because it sounds
Yeah.
like, an adventure, and you're also an adventure with a goal. Like you have a goal. Like,
Cool. Yeah.
am I gonna be the smartest person in the world? So you kind of have to read to the end. I did not turn out to be the smartest. Spoiler there. But yeah, and this is, as I say, not for everyone. I'm not saying this is the genre that everyone should write, but I do think some readers find it appealing, like to be taken along on this journey. So it makes it more narrative. It's not like, here are my 10 conclusions. It's like, here's how I started, and here's what I learned this time. And here's the weird side street I went down and discovered this. So that's why I like the word quest.
That's awesome. AJ, what would be kind of your parting piece of advice for the AJ of how many ever years ago, pre-book one, and all the other AJs out there who are thinking about writing their first book?
Well, that's very nice. I hope there's some. I do think the primacy of original ideas, for me, that is so key. So I do recommend, some people get their ideas in the shower or taking a walk. I actually find it very useful to, as we talked about, sort of make an appointment. Say, like, for these 15 minutes, I'm not going to look at the phone. I'm not going to, I'm going to go offline and just generate ideas. And don't stop until the end of the 15 minutes, because sometimes the gems come right at the end. And then, yeah, to me, especially starting out, no one's going to come and say, hey, would you write about this? So
yeah,
just take a topic, it could be whatever is in the news, maybe, like, take a topic like, I don't know, you could even take infrastructure. It's a very boring word, but it's important. And then just like spin out for 15 minutes. What could you do about infrastructure? What's interesting about it? What new angle can you take on it? So that's, I guess, my big piece of advice that has worked for me.
Cool. That's awesome, AJ. And now, this is just a random question, but have you ever heard of Mark Rober, YouTube guy?
I feel I have. Tell me what he does.
So he just creates but it just dawned on me as we're doing this interview. I'm like, I feel like Mark Rober is like the AJ Jacobs of YouTube. It's like this guy that does very interesting, like carnival games. How do they work and how do you win them? Like,
I have my
just crazy stuff like that. And then it's like a 23-minute video that just goes into the whole thing. So it's like very much more short form content, but like tackling this interesting thing. It's the guy who you probably saw. He did the glitter bomb, the mail prank. People, you ever see that?
I don't know if I saw that one.
People were stealing his packages, his Amazon packages, and then he turns it into a glitter bomb.
Oh, that was good. That was good. All right. I'm gonna look him up. I mean, I worked a little with Morgan Spurlock, who did the Super Size Me, where he ate only McDonald's.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, he's sort of in the similar genre.
Yeah,
I'm a fan of his.
Well, AJ, this has been so awesome, man. So, guys, AJ's upcoming book, It releases in April. I think if I'm not, yeah, it's April. It looks like April 26th of 2022. So depending on when you're listening to this or watching this, pre-order it or just buy it if it's already out. So the book's called The Puzzler: One Man's Quest to Solve the Most Baffling Puzzles Ever, from crosswords to jigsaws to the meaning of life. AJ, where can people go to buy your book, pre-order your book, or just check out more about what you're up to?
There are the usual places, ajjacobs.com, or I'm on AJ Jacobs at Twitter, and I love to hear from people. So yeah, send me a note. And thank you, Chandler. That was so fun. I had a great time, and I'll be listening to get other tips from other authors and marketers.
I appreciate that. Thank you, AJ. Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you can be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. All right, number 1, I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts, number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help the podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode. If you're on the fence about scheduling a publishing consultation call with my team, maybe you're not quite ready for that, I've got some free training that I think will be really helpful for you. All right, all you have to do is go to register to sign up. Go to selfpublishing.com/free training. When you do, you're also going to get a free digital copy of my new book, Published. And on that training, you're going to learn the next steps of how to implement with your book. So how to write, how to publish, how to launch successfully. So go to register right now at selfpublishing.com/free training. I'll see you there.